The wind screamed over the endless white plain. Snow swirled like ghostly shapes, dancing in the freezing air before vanishing into the blizzard. Ethan pulled his fur-lined hood tighter around his head and kept moving. His boots crunched deep into the ice with every step, and his breath came out in white clouds that quickly froze against his scarf. His ship lay somewhere behind him, broken from the crash. It had been a smooth flight at first, just a routine supply run. But the sudden storm had forced him into a rough landing. Now the hull was torn, the engines useless, and the navigation system half buried under a sheet of ice. Ethan knew he needed shelter. The heater in the ship could only run for a few more hours before it died completely. He had been searching for a cave or even an old supply outpost when he thought he heard something strange. A sound that didn't belong to the howling wind. At first, he thought it was just his imagination. A faint noise, almost like a cry, carried on the freezing gusts. He stopped walking, holding his breath, and listened again. There it was, soft but desperate. A voice. He turned his head toward the sound and began moving, each step heavy and slow in the deep snow. The wind pushed against him, but he kept going. As he drew closer, the noise became clearer. Multiple voices, weak and trembling. Then he saw them. Huddled under the remains of a collapsed snow shelter were 3 figures. Their skin was pale, almost silvery, and faint blue lines seemed to glow along their faces and hands. Their eyes, large and luminous, watched him with a mix of fear and hope. They were alien. There was no doubt about that. But more than that, they were freezing to death. Ethan's first thought was that they were children, but as he got closer, he realized they were young women, sisters maybe. Their thin clothing was no match for the storm, and frost clung to their hair and eyelashes. One of them, the smallest, wasn't even moving, her head resting on the shoulder of the eldest. He knelt beside them. "Can you understand me?" he asked, speaking slowly. The eldest sister's lips moved, and she spoke in a broken form of the common trade language. "Cold. Help, please." There was no time to waste. Ethan dropped his pack, pulling out 3 thermal blankets. He wrapped them around each sister, tucking the edges tightly. The middle sister flinched at his touch, but when the warmth began to spread, she relaxed. "My ship," Ethan said, pointing back toward the direction he had come from. "It's not far. Heater. Safe." The eldest seemed to understand. She nodded weakly, trying to lift the smallest sister, but her arms shook from exhaustion. Ethan took the smallest into his own arms. She was frighteningly light, as if the cold had drained every bit of strength from her body. The journey back was slow and painful. Ethan's muscles burned as he carried the smallest sister, and the snow reached up to his knees in some places. The other 2 followed closely, stumbling often but refusing to stop. The storm howled around them, and at times Ethan worried they wouldn't make it. When the broken silhouette of his ship finally came into view, relief rushed through him. He led them inside, sealing the hatch against the wind. The air inside was cold, but compared to the outside, it felt almost warm. He lowered the smallest sister onto the padded bench near the heater and guided the other 2 to sit beside her. "Stay close to the heat," Ethan said, adjusting the dial. The eldest reached out, touching the metal surface of the heater, then quickly pulled her hand back, startled by the warmth. A faint smile appeared on her face. Ethan worked quickly, boiling some water on the portable stove. He poured it into a container and handed it to them, miming a drinking motion. The middle sister took the first sip, her eyes widening at the sudden rush of heat in her body. She passed it to the eldest, who then gave it to the youngest, as they drank. Ethan studied them more closely. Their faces had delicate features with high cheekbones and slightly pointed ears. Faint, natural markings ran across their skin, almost like tattoos, but softer and glowing gently in the dim light. After a while, the eldest spoke again. "We, Silari," she said slowly, as if testing the words. "Village, gone." Snow. Fall? Ethan nodded, piecing together her meaning. Avalanche? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Big, ice, crush, home, many, gone. Her eyes dropped to the floor, and her voice grew quieter. Mother, father, gone. The middle sister curled closer to her, and Ethan felt a weight settle in his chest. He didn't know much about the Solari, but he could see they had been through something terrible. You're safe here, Ethan said softly. I'll keep you warm until we figure something out. The eldest looked at him for a long moment as if searching his face for any sign of a lie. Finally, she nodded again. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the broken ship, the heater hummed softly. The sisters sat together, wrapped in blankets, their shivering slowly fading. Ethan sat nearby, watching the heater's gauge. He knew they couldn't stay here forever. Fuel was running low, and once it was gone, the ship would become just as cold as the frozen plains outside. But for now, at least, they were alive. And Ethan silently promised himself, no matter what it took, he would get them to safety. The storm did not end that night. It grew worse. Heavy winds rattled the broken panels of the ship, and snow piled higher outside. Every time the heater gave a faint flicker, Ethan glanced at the fuel gauge, knowing it was slowly running out. The sisters had huddled close together near the warmth, wrapped in blankets. The smallest one, who had been barely conscious when Ethan found her, was now awake but weak. Her voice was soft when she spoke, and her words were still difficult for him to understand. Ethan knelt down beside them. "What are your names?" he asked slowly. The eldest sister hesitated before answering. She touched her chest and said, Liara. Then she motioned to the middle sister. Selene? Finally, she placed a gentle hand on the youngest's shoulder. Nira, he repeated, the names to make sure he got them right. Liara, Selene, and Nira. Liara gave a small nod. You? Ethan, he said, pointing to himself. Selene tried to say it, but it came out more like Ethan. Ethan smiled at her effort. They were still shivering, so he poured hot water into another container and handed it over. Drink slowly, he said, gesturing with his hands. While they sipped, Ethan worked at the small control console. He managed to power up a dim light inside the cabin, but the main systems were still frozen or damaged. The navigation screen was cracked, and the long-range comms antenna had been ripped away in the crash. If I can get the short-range transmitter working, Ethan thought aloud, maybe someone will hear us. Liara tilted her head, not understanding all of his words, but she seemed to sense he was trying to help. She moved closer, watching as he carefully adjusted the wiring. Hours passed in the dim light. Ethan repaired what he could with the limited tools he had. Every so often, he stopped to check on the sisters. He noticed their breathing had steadied, and their eyes no longer looked dull from the cold. When he offered them a packet of emergency rations, Liara studied it carefully before opening it. The scent made Selene wrinkle her nose, but hunger quickly won. They ate in silence, their hands moving slowly as if they had not had a proper meal in days. When the food was gone, Ethan leaned back against the wall and asked, "What happened to your village?" Liara's face grew serious. Ground shake, big ice fall, many run, some not run fast. She paused and her eyes lowered. Only 3. Ethan felt a twist in his chest. He had seen loss before, wars, disasters, but being stranded with no family on a frozen moon was a fate he would never wish on anyone. Were you trying to reach another village? He asked. Yes, Liara said slowly. Old place, far, storm, take us wrong way. Ethan thought for a moment. There's an old communications relay to the north. If we can get there, maybe we can send a signal. Selene frowned. North, far, cold. I know, Ethan said, but if we stay here too long, the heat will run out. He glanced at the fuel gauge again. The needle was dropping faster than he wanted. Nira's voice, small but steady, spoke for the first time. "You help us?" Ethan turned to her, meeting her bright, fragile eyes. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll help you. I promise." That night, while the sisters slept, Ethan planned. He laid out the thickest thermal blankets, checked his emergency heater packs, and packed the food into his weatherproof bag. He sharpened the survival blade he carried, not for fighting, but for cutting through ice if needed. He also took one last look at the short-range transmitter. With a few careful adjustments, it came to life, its screen flickering faintly. He tapped a button, sending out a repeating beacon. It wasn't strong, but maybe, just maybe, someone nearby would hear. The next morning, the storm was still heavy, but slightly weaker. Pale light filtered through the cracks in the hull. Ethan woke the sisters and helped them layer on the spare insulated clothing he had. The sleeves were too long and the boots were loose, but it was better than nothing. As they prepared to leave, Liara looked around the cabin and then back at Ethan. "This home?" she asked. "For now," Ethan said with a faint smile, "but we'll find a better one." The wind outside was bitter, biting through even the thick clothing. Ethan took the lead, cutting a narrow path through the snow. The sisters stayed close behind, holding on to each other for balance. Every so often he stopped to let them rest. They walked in near silence, except for the soft crunch of snow under their boots and the distant roar of the wind. Sometimes Ethan glanced back to check on them. Celine always gave him a tired but determined nod, while Liara's eyes stayed alert, scanning the horizon. Nira stumbled once, and Ethan caught her before she fell. "Easy," he said gently. She gave him a small smile of thanks. As the hours passed, the snow began to thin, revealing patches of frozen rock. In the distance, Ethan thought he saw a faint outline, a shape that could be part of the relay station. "Almost there," he called, but his voice was nearly swallowed by the wind. Their pace quickened, hope pushing them forward. They didn't know yet if the relay would work, but just having a goal made the cold feel less crushing. Still, the journey was far from over. Dark clouds gathered again above them, and Ethan knew another storm might be on the way. They had to reach the relay before it hit, or risk being trapped in the open. As they moved toward the shadow on the horizon, Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Somewhere between finding them in the snow and leading them through the white, these sisters had become his responsibility, and he wasn't going to let the frozen world take them. The wind had not eased, but Ethan could see the outline of the relay station more clearly now. It rose from the frozen ground like a dark, jagged tooth against the endless white. The sight gave him a surge of hope, but he kept his pace steady. The sisters were tired, and pushing them too hard could be dangerous. "Almost there," he called back, his voice carried away by the wind. Liara, walking just behind him, gave a short nod. Celine kept a tight grip on Nira's arm to help her. "Stay steady." The youngest sister stumbled often, her small legs sinking deep into the snow, but she refused to stop. As they drew closer, Ethan noticed the station's antenna was bent, almost snapped in half. Ice had built up along its sides, and one of the support beams had collapsed. The front hatch was half buried under snow, only the upper edge visible. "Wait here," Ethan said, lowering his pack. He waded forward and began clearing the snow with his hands and the edge of his survival blade. After several minutes, he managed to free the hatch enough to pull it open. It groaned loudly, protesting after years of disuse, but finally swung inward. Inside, the air was still and heavy with the smell of cold metal. Frost clung to the walls, and the dim interior lights flickered weakly. Ethan stepped inside first, checking for any signs of danger. The place was silent, no sign of recent life. "Come in," he called. The sisters followed, moving carefully over the icy floor. Once the hatch closed behind them, the howling of the wind faded, leaving a deep, quiet stillness. Ethan's eyes scanned the control room. The main console was coated in frost. The screens cracked in places. The backup generator sat in the corner, covered with a thick layer of dust and ice. "This might work," he muttered, moving toward it. "If we can power it up, we can send a signal." Liara watched as he brushed off the frost and tried the power switch. Nothing happened. The generator was dead. "Problem?" she asked. "Yeah," Ethan sighed. "The fuel cells are empty." He checked the storage compartments but found only scraps of old tools and rusted parts. Celine moved closer, looking at the broken antenna outside through a small window. "This fix?" she asked. "It's bent, but if we can get power, I can send a short-range signal," Ethan said. "Someone might pick it up." Liara frowned. "No power, no signal." He nodded grimly. Without power, the relay was useless. Ethan thought hard. He still had a few small heater fuel cells in his pack, meant for portable heat packs. They weren't designed for a generator, but maybe, just maybe, he could adapt them. He pulled the pack closer and began working. The sisters watched silently as he cut the connectors and rewired the cells to fit the generator's intake. His fingers grew numb in the cold, but he kept going. Neera shuffled closer, holding out her hands. "Help?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Hold this," he said, handing her a small tool. She gripped it tightly, her breath visible in the chilly air. After almost an hour of careful work, Ethan slid the last cell into place and tried the switch again. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a cough and a low rumble, the generator came to life. The lights in the station brightened slightly, and a faint hum filled the room. The sisters' eyes widened. Neera grinned, and Celine let out a relieved breath. "Good," Liara said simply. Ethan turned to the main console, brushing off more frost. He activated the relay's systems, watching as old code scrolled across the cracked display. The transmitter was functional but badly damaged. The range would be short and the signal weak. "We'll have to boost it," he said. But before he could start, a deep creak echoed through the station. The floor vibrated slightly under his boots. He froze, listening. "What?" "That?" Celine asked. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Ice shift," he guessed. "The storm's pressure might be causing cracks under the station." The sound came again, louder this time. A chunk of frost fell from the ceiling. They didn't have long. Working. Quickly, Ethan set the relay to broadcast an automated distress call. He adjusted the frequency to the standard emergency channel, then hit transmit. The console emitted a faint pulse of light with each signal burst. "Now we wait," he said. Minutes dragged by. The sisters sat near the wall, conserving their strength. Outside, the storm grew louder again, hammering the metal walls. Then, static. The console flickered. Ethan leaned forward, turning the dial. Through the crackling noise, a faint voice came through. "Copy. Signal. Location." His heart leapt. "This is Ethan, human explorer, stranded with 3 survivors. Requesting immediate rescue. Coordinates transmitting now." There was a pause, more static, and then, "Signal weak. Storm. Hold position. Coming." Ethan exhaled in relief. He turned to the sisters. "They're coming for us." But before they could react, a violent shudder ran through the station. The floor tilted slightly and a low groan filled the air. Liara's eyes widened. "Fall." "Maybe," Ethan said, scanning the walls. "The ice under us might be breaking." The rescue team was on the way, but they would have to survive until it arrived. And with the station's structure groaning under the storm's pressure, that was far from certain. Ethan tightened the straps on his pack and looked at the sisters. "Stay close to me. If this place goes, we head for the rocks outside. No matter what." Liara nodded firmly. Celine took Neera's hand. The storm roared on, and the station trembled again. They had sent the call for help, but now came the hardest part, staying alive long enough to be found. The station groaned again, louder this time. Dust and frost shook loose from the ceiling, drifting down like fine snow. Ethan's eyes swept the room, measuring the angle of the floor. It was tilting, just slightly, but enough to tell him the ice beneath them was giving way. Outside, the storm raged harder, slamming into the walls with a deep, low howl. The sound was almost like an animal circling its prey. Liara stood quickly, gripping Nira's arm. "Ethan, this place not safe." "No," he said, checking the straps on his pack. "Rescue is on the way, but we can't be inside if this collapses." Celine frowned, glancing at the door. "Storm. Very strong." "Better the storm than being buried under ice," Ethan replied. The station shuddered again, and the faint sound of cracking echoed from below. That was all the warning they needed. Ethan slung his pack over his shoulder, grabbed his survival blade, and motioned toward the hatch. "Stay close to me. Don't let go," he said firmly. He pushed the hatch open, and a blast of icy wind nearly knocked them back. Snow swirled into the doorway, forcing Ethan to shield his face with one arm. The cold stabbed through their clothes like knives, but they stepped out into the blizzard anyway. The moment they were outside, the world became a blur of white. The wind roared in their ears, and visibility dropped to only a few meters. Ethan took the lead, cutting a path with slow, heavy steps. The sisters clung to each other and stayed right behind him. Behind them, the relay station gave one final groan before part of the roof caved in with a deafening crash. The sound was swallowed quickly by the storm. They had no choice now. They were out in the open. Ethan knew there was a rocky ridge to the east. If they could reach it, they might find shelter from the wind until the rescue arrived. But reaching it meant crossing a stretch of open ice, where deep fissures could be hidden under the snow. "Watch your step," he shouted over the wind. "Stay right behind me." The snow was uneven here. Sometimes it crunched solidly under his boots. Other times it shifted and sank, making him test each step before putting his full weight down. Halfway across, a sudden crack split the air. Ethan froze. The ground under his right boot sagged slightly. "Don't move," he called. "Back." He crouched and brushed away the snow, revealing a dark gap in the ice beneath, a hidden crevasse. Moving slowly, he stepped back and motioned for the sisters to follow his exact path around the danger. Liara's eyes were wide, but she kept calm, guiding Celine and Nira carefully around the thin ice. When they reached solid ground again, Ethan allowed himself a breath of relief. They pushed forward for another 20 minutes, the storm showing no sign of letting up. Finally, the jagged outline of the ridge appeared through the white haze. The rocks rose like frozen teeth, their dark surfaces covered in a thin layer of ice. "Almost there," Ethan shouted. As they reached the base of the ridge, the wind lessened, slightly, the rocks breaking some of its force. Ethan led them along a narrow path until they found a shallow overhang. It wasn't much, but it blocked the worst of the snow. They huddled together under the rock, their backs against the icy wall. Ethan quickly pulled out his portable heater packs and cracked them to release warmth. He placed one in each of the sisters' hands before taking one for himself. Liara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't thank me yet," Ethan said. "We still have to wait for the rescue." The hours crawled by. The storm made it impossible to tell day from night, the sky hidden behind thick clouds. Ethan kept checking the horizon for any sign of movement. The cold tried to creep into their bones, but the heater packs and their shared body heat kept it at bay. Celine broke the silence once. "You... not from here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "No," Ethan replied. "I'm from a world much warmer than this." Nira tilted her head. "Warm? Like fire? Warmer, Ethan said with a faint smile. Sunlight you can feel on your skin. Air that smells like trees. Water you can swim in without freezing. The sisters exchanged glances, as if trying to imagine such a place. Another loud crack echoed from somewhere beyond the ridge, making them all flinch. Ethan gripped his blade tighter, though he knew no weapon would help against an avalanche. Then, through the wind, he thought he heard something else. A low hum, rising and falling. It didn't sound like the storm. It sounded mechanical. He stood quickly and climbed a few steps up the rock for a better view. Through the swirling snow, a faint red light appeared in the distance, moving steadily toward them. Rescue, Ethan breathed. He slid back down. They're here. Stay close. It took several minutes for the craft to reach them. As it drew nearer, Ethan saw it was sleek and silver, its engines glowing faintly. It hovered just above the snow, sending out a wave of warm air from its underside. Hatch opened on the side, and two figures stepped out. Solari, like the sisters, dressed in heavy cold-weather suits. One of them called out in their native tongue, and Liara's face lit up. Ethan helped Nira to her feet, and together they moved toward the ship. The rescuers ushered them inside, the sudden warmth of the cabin wrapping around them like a blanket. As the hatch closed, Liara turned to Ethan. You come with us? He hesitated, glancing back once at the white wilderness outside. Yeah, he said finally. Let's get out of this frozen nightmare. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end, because in a galaxy this dangerous, debts of survival often led to paths no one could predict. The rescue craft lifted off smoothly, rising above the blinding snow. Ethan sat near the rear, watching the frozen landscape vanish beneath them. The heat inside the cabin felt almost unreal after so many days in the cold. Nira sat beside him, her small hands wrapped around a steaming cup the rescuers had given her. Celine leaned against Liara, eyes half closed from exhaustion. For the first time since he had found them, the sisters looked safe. The two Solari rescuers spoke quietly in their own language. One of them, a tall male with dark markings along. His jaw glanced at Ethan more than once, his expression unreadable. Ethan could tell the man wasn't entirely sure what to make of a human sitting in his rescue craft. The journey lasted less than an hour. Through the small viewing window, Ethan saw the settlement appear. Tall, curved buildings made of some dark metal, their surfaces glittering with ice. Warm light shone from narrow windows, and thick barriers surrounded the entire area to keep out the worst of the storms. As the craft landed inside the gates, several Solari came forward. They wore long, insulated coats, and their breath rose in clouds in the cold air. Their eyes went immediately to the sisters, and several gasps and cries followed. Liara was the first to step out. A woman rushed to her, wrapping her in a trembling embrace. Celine and Nira were pulled into the hug as well. The sound of their voices was filled with relief and tears. Ethan stepped off the craft slowly, unsure of where to go. The tall male rescuer said something to the group, and several heads turned toward Ethan. The warmth of the reunion faded slightly, replaced by whispers and cautious looks. A broad-shouldered Solari male stepped forward. His voice was deep, his words slow in the trade language. You human? Yes, Ethan replied, keeping his tone calm. You bring them here? I found them in the snow. They would have died if I hadn't helped, Ethan said. The male's eyes narrowed slightly. Human help? Why? Because it was the right thing to do, Ethan answered without hesitation. The male studied him for a long moment before giving a slow nod. Come. Elders decide. Ethan followed them into a large circular building at the center of the settlement. The walls were decorated with glowing patterns that reminded him of the markings on the sisters' skin. The air inside was warmer, and the faint scent of something like wood smoke lingered. At the far end of the room, 3 elders sat behind a long table. Their eyes were sharp, their clothes layered with thick, embroidered fabrics. The one in the middle spoke first. "You have brought back 3 of our people," the elder said. "Liara, Selene, and Nira. This is a great thing. But you are an outsider." "Yes," Ethan said simply. "But when I found them, they were freezing under a collapsed shelter. I couldn't leave them." Liara stepped forward before the elders could reply. "He saved us," she said firmly. "Many times. He shared heat, food, and water. He carried Nira when she could not walk. Without him, we would not be here." Selena nodded. "He risked himself in the storm to bring us to safety." Nira's small voice added, "He promised to help us." And he did. The elders listened in silence. Finally, the middle elder spoke again. "Your words carry weight. The human will be allowed to stay, for now. But our trust is not given easily." Ethan inclined his head. "That's fair. I'm not here to cause trouble." A place was found for Ethan in one of the smaller dwellings near the settlement wall. It was simple. A single bed, a table, and a small heater. But it was warm and dry. Over the next 2 days, he noticed the mixed reactions from the villagers. Some offered polite nods when they saw him. Others avoided his eyes altogether. Children watched from a distance, curious but too shy to approach. The sisters visited often. They brought food, strange but flavorful stews, soft bread-like rolls, and spiced tea that warmed him from the inside out. They also told him more about their home. Before the avalanche, their village had been part of a trade route that connected smaller mountain communities. Now, many of those paths were buried under ice. The survivors here were still trying to rebuild, but resources were scarce. One evening, as snow drifted down outside, Liara came to his dwelling alone. "There is talk," she said quietly. "Some think you are here for reason, that you want something from us." Ethan frowned. "All I wanted was to get you to safety. I don't have any other plan." "I believe you," she said. "But not all will." Before he could respond, a loud horn sounded from the outer wall. Liara's eyes widened. "Trouble," she whispered. They stepped outside into the cold. Villagers were gathering near the gates. Solari guards stood ready with long polearms, their eyes fixed on the swirling snow beyond. Shapes moved in the white, tall, bulky, and slow. "Ice beasts," Liara said grimly. "They come to hunt food or warmth." Ethan felt his instincts sharpen. He had no weapon but his blade, yet he wasn't about to hide while others faced danger. "Where do you need me?" he asked. Liara looked at him for a moment, then pointed toward a section of the wall where one of the guards was signaling for help. Without hesitation, Ethan moved. Whatever trust the villagers lacked, he intended to earn it with action, not words. The shapes in the snow grew larger, moving slowly but with heavy strength. The villagers murmured in tense voices, gripping their weapons tighter. Ethan could now make out the beasts, massive, fur-covered creatures with long, curved tusks and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their wide paws crunched into the snow, spreading their weight to keep from sinking. The Solari called them ice beasts, but to Ethan, they looked like something between a woolly mammoth and a polar bear. Their thick hides could shrug off most blows, and their sheer size made them dangerous even without aggression. One of the guards shouted an order, and the villagers moved into positions along the wall. A few climbed onto raised platforms to use crossbows that fired thick, barbed bolts. Others stayed on the ground with long pole arms, ready to keep the beasts from breaking through. Ethan reached the section of the wall where a guard waved him over. The guard handed him a spear-like weapon. It was heavier than it looked, made of some strong metal, with a blade that curved like a hook. "Hook leg. Push back," the guard said in broken trade language, pointing toward the beasts. Not let pass. Ethan nodded, gripping the weapon. He wasn't trained in Solari fighting styles, but he understood the idea. Trip the beasts, keep them away from the gates. A deep roar rolled over the snow, and the largest beast charged forward, shaking its massive head. The wall trembled as its tusks scraped against the outer barrier. Two more followed, trying to circle toward weaker spots. The guards shouted, jabbing with their polearms. Ethan moved alongside them, striking at the nearest beast's leg. The hook bit into its thick fur, and with a hard pull, he made the beast stumble sideways. Another guard took the opening and slammed a heavy bolt into its shoulder. But the creatures were relentless. One slammed its weight against the gate, making the wood groan. Ethan rushed forward, planting his spear into the snow and using it to brace his body against the impact. His muscles strained, but he held the position long enough for two Solari to join him. Together, they pushed the beast back a few steps. Above them, crossbows fired. The bolts hit with dull thuds, burying into the beast's hides. One creature roared in pain and turned away, limping toward the snowy plain. But another rushed in to take its place. Celine and Nira stood with the other villagers, passing extra bolts and heater packs to the fighters. Liara, gripping a smaller weapon, stayed near Ethan's side, watching for any beast that broke through. "Left side!" she shouted suddenly. Ethan turned to see a smaller beast, still larger than any human, climbing over a section of the wall where the snow had piled high. Without thinking, he ran toward it. As it lunged, he ducked low, driving the hook of his weapon into its front leg. It bellowed in pain and stumbled forward, crashing into the snow. A guard finished it with a heavy bolt to the neck. Ethan pulled his weapon free, breathing hard, his face stung by the cold wind. The fight dragged on for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Finally, after several of their number were injured and two lay still in the snow, the beasts decided it wasn't worth the effort. They turned slowly, retreating into the white, their massive forms fading until they were gone. The villagers stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath. The guards began checking the walls for damage, while others tended to the wounded. Liara came to Ethan, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion. "You fought well," she said simply. "Just doing my part," Ethan replied, resting the butt of the spear in the snow. The tall male from the rescue craft approached. His expression was different now, no longer guarded but respectful. "You fight like Solari," he said in the trade language. "I fight like someone who doesn't want to see good people hurt," Ethan answered. The man gave a short nod. "You saved sisters. You helped village. You are one of us now." Word of Ethan's actions spread quickly. By nightfall, even those who had avoided him before now greeted him with nods or small smiles. Children crept closer, curiosity overcoming shyness, asking about his home and the world beyond the snow. That evening, the elders called him to the central hall again. The middle elder spoke. "You came to us as a stranger. Now, you are not. Our people owe you a debt." "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said, "but thank you." The elder gestured toward Liara, Celine, and Nira. "These three speak for you, and so do your actions. You may stay here as long as you wish. If you choose to leave, you will not leave as an outsider." Ethan glanced at the sisters. They were smiling, real smiles, not the tired, cold ones from before. Nira gave a small nod as if to say, "You belong here now." That night, as the settlement settled into quiet, Ethan stood at the wall looking out at the endless snow. The stars shone faintly through thin clouds, cold and distant. He thought of the day he had crashed here, of the voices in the wind, and of the moment he had found three fragile figures huddled under the snow. He hadn't known then that saving them would change his life. But now, standing in a place where he was no longer a stranger, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: belonging. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of the village fires. Ethan turned back toward the warm lights. The frozen world had taken much from the Solari, but for him, it had given something unexpected: family.